Welcome to Whiskey Lore, the interviews. I am your host, Drew Hanish, the Amazon best-selling author of Whiskey Lore's Travel Guide to Experiencing Irish Whiskey and Whiskey Lore's Travel Guide to Experiencing Kentucky Bourbon, and soon, the history of Tennessee whiskey. And today, I have as my special guest, Richard Paterson of White Mackay. Now, this is going to be a second half of an interview that I started last week, so if you haven't caught that, please go back and check that out. We talk about the 1960s, how he got started in the business, and really what distilling and blending was like back in that time period. And today we're going to dive in further and go through the 70s when he started with White Mackay, go through some of that history. But we're also going to talk about blenders and their journey back then when companies were a lot more private and it was a little bit harder to learn your craft when you were kind of isolated within your own company. So we're going to talk about that, talk about chill filtering. It's actually changed over the years. The opinions about it have changed over the years. We're going to talk about that, talk about drinking glasses. We're going to talk about a special blend that all the blenders got together, all the big blenders. And a funny little note there about something that Billy Walker said to Richard Paterson that you'll get a chuckle out of that coming up as well. And some history thrown in there as well. We're going to talk about the history of the Dalmore, at least a little bit, and Richard's experience in meeting the owner of the Dalmore at that particular time. So I hope you enjoy this. And please, if you have feedback, you drop it below. Love to hear your comments. And let's check out this interview. Enjoy. So how hard was it in terms of shifting to when you went to White Mackay? They had they seemed to promote lighter whiskeys at that time. And I think that was an industry thing basically too at that particular time. When I hear you talk about whiskeys, I hear you talk about muscly whiskeys with a nice backbone. And I get a sense that's kind of your sweet spot where you like to be in terms of whiskeys. Is there, for a blender, a challenge sometimes in stepping into a style that maybe isn't first nature to them?
I think you must have respectability for the blending house that you're going to work for. The recipe is, you inherit that, you must maintain that. But over the years, what you can do, like when we say light whiskeys, White Mackay was a light whiskey because they wanted to attract the female audience. And because it was very blinking male orientated, pinstripe suits, et cetera, et cetera. So this light, easy blend, because of the marrying that we did, actually conformed to the changes that are going on to this day. Because harsh whiskies are no longer the case. They've got to be drinkable, palatable. They've got to give you a warm, glowing aftertaste. And that's what we've always tried to do. But it's a harmony. That word harmony, mellow, charm, elegance, refinement. It has to have that, because a lot of people, if you get that horrible word burn, there's something not right. They all have to come together. I mean, we get all this marketing jungle saying, oh, it's about the orchestra playing in harmony. Well, actually, it is. It's something that glows and just gives you that harmonization. And that silky, I mean, a whiskey should still go down by silk. So that's important. But then everybody has a style.
Yeah. Well, and for me, I love a nice mouthfeel to a whiskey, a nice heavy mouthfeel to it. Glenglassaugh is one of my favorite distilleries because every time I sip something from there, it has a lot of body to the whiskey. And it's interesting when you were talking about choices of, whiskeys for doing blends. That's one of those distilleries that usually gets mentioned as one where probably not as great for blends because it has such a heavy character on its own that it makes it difficult to work with. How does that work in terms of when you're blending these together? Are you trying to maybe take little elements of those heavier third level whiskeys, but you're using more of a base out of your first level whiskeys?
Right. There's no question when you're talking about lowlands, but particularly the Speyside, that some of them are just pure charm, elegance, refinement, unsurpassed quality that is got that finesse. But if you've got too much finesse, it becomes this we need more muscle here to build it up. It's too faint. It's too light. We need to prop it up with muscular highlands, and to give us that backbone. But what we find is you use the heavier malts with a lighter, they'll come together in perfect harmony, providing you get the right balance and the proportions are looked at. And then when you've got that emerging, you then think of Campbellton, and then you think of Isla, that's going to add to that. But they all play their part.
Yeah. So, thinking about how you learn all of this stuff, when you in 1975 became the chief blender, you'd worked as an assistant for some time before that. Um, but kind of when I got started I did web design for years, and once you become the top guy, there's not a lot of people around to talk to unless you're going to go talk to people who are probably your competitors or that sort of thing. Um, how did you handle the early years of being a blender and being able to extend your knowledge? Did you have relationships that you kind of built with people through that time?
Uh, Very good question. Number one is, as probably I go by two sayings: knowledge is power. When the executive stops learning, he's finished. And that's why the Wine Spirit Education Trust, formed in 1969, was my guiding light to open me up not only to whiskey, but to wines, because it would give me the knowledge I was looking for. I looked and studied on every book on the subject. There was no computers, there was no nothing, but I talked to as many people as I possibly could. But quite often the doors were slammed in your face because it was very difficult. I always talk about 1997, when we had the Frankfurt Whiskey Festival, 1998, when the first New York Whiskey Festival, and when we went into the 1990s and early 2000s, that's when all the blenders traveled around the world in their kilts, and we exchanged talking and finding out, and found out very quickly the problem we have at White Mackay, Dalmore, Jura, Federica, Tamlafulin is exactly the same as every other distillery. But they were not all giving away the trade secrets, but at least they were being more approachable, and that was a good thing. But learning in the early days was actually making sure you physically got out there and saw the changes going on for yourself. Because it was blended whiskey. Okay, Glenfiddich would not. It would take till 1964 when Glenfiddich, Macallan's, and all that would be bringing out their single malts. But it really was the whiskey festivals that really launch padded it.
Mm. You mention in the book, you go through the history of Dalmore, and we could probably spend a whole podcast episode talking about the history of Dalmore. But Andrew Mackenzie, they stuck with single malt, it sounds like, for into the 20th century. When did they give that up?
No, well, number one, Andrew Mackenzie, when he came along in 1867 with his brother, started his production in January 1868. He doubled the capacity in 1874. But people found, even during these early years, actually, this is not a bad single malt. Yeah, we have self whiskey. And then people say, what's self whiskey? New Spirit. This is what was being sold.
Mm.
And Andrew Mackenzie said, well, I can mature it for 3-4 years, maybe 5 years. And when he released it, some of them were a bit heavy. So he said, well, we'll just watch the cutoff points a wee bit more. And then he said, after a bit, actually, there's great demand for here. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay down stocks. And they said, what are you going to do? Wait a minute, blended whiskey's 3, 4, 5 years old. What are you thinking for single malt? Oh, I'm thinking of doing it for 15, 20, 30, 40 years. And they said, no, you can't be serious. I said, that's what we're doing. And when we talk about Gordon MacPhail, yeah, they did the same, but very few people know this. And that's why we built up old stocks, and we've been able to release them, even to this day. But it's something that was done many, many years ago because of the changes. And even when we talk about 1867, 1868, we were using sherry casks.
Mm-hmm.
We were still, bringing casks in 1915 from Gonzales Bays. We've got written documentation showing that. But it allowed us to take that heavy character, the bulbous stills of Dalmore, nurture them and season them in the right wood. And that, to my mind, is what gives me such warmth and satisfaction, really seeing the development. Yes, great in American white oak. American white oak for Speysides and all these, fantastic. But when you take the right sherry that suits your particular style of malt, you can bring it to an added level of luxury.
Nice. So when you went to Dalmore the first time, what was your impression? Was this, how many distilleries had you been to before then? And was there something that kind of, because I sense that Dalmore is really kind of your, I won't say favorite distillery, but the one that you are most connected with.
I'm a lot of connected with Dalmore, but I have to say the love I have for Jura, Tamnaville, and Fettercairn, and Invergordon. I mean, it's the people. You never forget that. But really, before I got to Dalmore, I'd gone to many distilleries. But the first thing that struck me was Colonel Mackenzie comes up and said, "Hi, Richard, I'm Colonel Mackenzie. I'm in charge of the distillery," which I obviously knew, but I hadn't really met him properly. And I took one look at him. Here he was in his kilt and his sporran, which was a bashed-in badger head. And he was just typical that distillery owner.
Mm.
And he was immensely proud. This is what we do at Dalmore, and we're going to show you. But they very quickly saw, what about the wood management? And it was kind of, well, we just get these cars from here, that cars from there, and we just get on with it. So there was no sense of urgency. It was just done. And of course, the demand for single malts was just in its infancy. It hadn't really got underway in the 70s, 80s. So it was just emerging.
Mm.
I mean, there was bottles there, but we were doing Dalmore 8 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old, and 20 years old. So they existed, but they had others of 9 years old, 11 years old. They had, quite a number of different expressions. But, I say, well, what's the sort of sherry between American white oak? And it was, well, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 15%. It just depends on what comes in from Spain.
Yeah.
So, or what comes in from down in London that they're not going to use.
When did the stag get on the bottles? This was what was interesting about visiting you at your offices and actually seeing that at one time they used to hang on a metal chain on the bottles. When did that come along?
No, Andrew Mackenzie, because of the charge of the Fury of the Stag of 1263, saving the king, it had always been part of the Mackenzie clan. Because he saved the king from the charging stag, King Alexander III said, you can use the emblem of your stag. So it doesn't matter. We've had many Americans coming over with their Mackenzie name, and they've got their tattoos on their head. They've got here, there, everywhere. But the stag's head has always been there. But when you see the early bottles, when the Mackenzies were in charge, it was almost a comical stag. There was even one with a stag with his tongue hanging out and sort of blood, because to remind of Colin Fitzgerald, chieftain of the Clan Mackenzie, saving the king. But over the years, we've really used that iconic emblem, and we've even transformed it. But it's taken years to get it onto the bottle the right way, and really to give that sense of the stag is so important to us.
Yeah. Talk about a little bit about the Black Isles, and I always love the name Black Isles because it sounds like if it were in America, we'd have pirates all around it. But the idea of where a lot of this grain comes from, and also kind of the tie-in to the Farintosh distillery. I'm wondering, is there are there any elements of that there were multiple distilleries, I think, around that area. Does any of that exist still?
Farintosh area, there's a lot of controversy about it was this area, was that area, it was near Culloden Moor, it was further up, no, it was up near where Dalmore is just now. Basically speaking, yeah, there are a number of areas where it was meant to exist, but Farintosh, because of Robert Burns' famous poem, Farintosh was sorely lost from coast to coast and all this. And then they had to pay duty, etc., for many years, and they were given freedom of duty. So it made it very famous, but it was a distilling area and also an illicit area. But I think, generally speaking, it was around, Inverness. Let me say it from there. Other people have said, oh, no, it's strongly documented, it's in this particular area. But, it could be just, you need to speak to one or two historians just to confirm that. Yeah. But it was famous for that distilling area. The Black Isle, of course. Why was it called Black Isle? Many people thought it was where the Black Watch came from. It was where there was forests. And some people said, actually, that's where they periodically burnt the heather and gave that sort of blackness to the area. But it's not an island, it's a peninsula.
Okay. I need to see it. I walked on the property of
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful area.
This is the drawback of having limited time when you come over to Scotland and trying to figure out all the places that you need to go to. I drove onto the campus of Dalmore, but I didn't have time to do a tour. And it's like, I got to come back here, because as soon as you start walking around, it's like, this place is beautiful. I know there's lots of stories surrounding that distillery that you when you go on these tours, that is what I think really connected so many people over these last 15 to 20 years, where whiskey has taken off, are these stories that are coming out of these distilleries.
I mean, the main thing to bear in mind is when you look where Dalmore is, anybody coming from America, what have you, you need to go to the distillery, and then just before you go in is to look in front of you. And what do you see? You see the Cromarty Firth, and then you see the Black Isle. And then beyond there is the North Sea. Now, when we have the Black Isle, it acts as a sort of shield, because the North Sea, a lot of winds blow in, or it comes down by the Cromarty Firth. And that's why Warehouse 4, dark limestone, sandstone buildings, really thick, excuse me, but really has a sort of protection of the cask, but it has that lovely sea air, that salinity. It's not really seen in the whiskey, but it has that sort of body and character that reflects what's in front of you. But Warehouse 4, which is where I have all the babies' gems, the jewels, the diamonds, we're all sparkling in there. That warehouse is really traditional, 3 high, dunnage warehouse. It's damp, and it's got the cement going down the pathway, but it's the old ashen floors. But that's where we get really the nurturing of the cask that I'm looking for. but to my mind, it's bathed by, people would say the terroir, but that's what's important there.
Yeah. So you do believe in this idea that that atmosphere finds its way into the cask.
Yeah, I mean, if you go just now in July, August, and we're now in August, coming up to September, already the environment is changing, but the warehouses generally just now are quite warm. I mean, they're not damp; they're just a little bit warm. But another month, another 6 weeks, the air will become heavier, and it will be sort of damper, and the whiskies will begin to go to sleep again.
Mm.
And then they're not going to change. Now, if it's going to be very dry, if it's a dry summer, they'll waken up for quite a few more months yet. But it only takes one really cold spell to get into the warehouses, and that's you until April next year.
Okay.
But again, they're all different. I must stress that. All warehouses, whether it be 3 high, pallets, racks, or the dunnage, will be different. But I'm just telling you, that's what helps to mold our particular styles and seasons, and still provide some of the mysteries of how it develops.
Yeah. So when we talk about the time that you've been with White Mackay, there's been a lot of changes of ownership through the years, but somehow, in fact, as I was going through it, I was going, we can't talk about all of these. We'll spend days going through all the different changes in owners through the years. But that adds in distilleries. That gives you the ability now to have a Jura come in and add to your arsenal, I guess, for lack of a better term, of different characters that you can bring into your blends. While all this turmoil is going on with changing from company to company, you're winning awards. So where's your mindset when a company is changing around you a lot? There's changes in leadership, attitudes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I always say 11 takeovers and 19 different bosses, but you got to come back to that favorite word, passion. You've got to make sure that I make no mistake, and I say it quite often, we've had to fight for what our reputation. We never had huge deep pockets, money that was just being thrown. We had to be very conservative. We didn't get it right all the time, but what we did try and do is to try and get value for money at every angle, every turn of the book. And I'd like to think, yeah, we've probably achieved that now, looking for the long term. Although quite often I was told, I'm in for the long term. I said, well, that's what the last owner said. But generally speaking, we talk about what is available. We've got a management, wood policy, etc., and as you can see, as from 2007, Scotch rocks, and it hasn't stopped since there. But we never can be complacent, because in the younger days when I started, it was cognac. That was the main drink,
Yeah.
and the packaging of in the supermarkets were the cheapest on display, and the packaging was generally pretty substandard. But now, if you don't have a wow factor and something that encourages the consumer to enjoy your whiskey, tell them a story about it, and really the label must try and enhance that. This is something that's a priority. But your liquid at the end of the day must be good.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all. That's what it's all about. It doesn't matter about the packaging. If it's the brilliant packaging, but if your product's not right, it's a waste of time. So you have to have all these combinations.
Well, you talked in the book about a packaging snafu when you had a bunch of outsiders coming in all of a sudden and trying to figure out the marketing for the company, and you decided to go with Blue Label White Mackay bottles. So talk about the issue with a Blue Label to an outsider.
Well, the Blue Label, if you take that color blue a kind of lighty, is a particular blue, but blue and gold, of the gold of the whiskey, doesn't quite match up. That's why we had cream labels for a long, long time. Cream and gold, they go perfectly, no problem. But certain individuals wanted to reach out. It was a very difficult time, and we decided to go this particular label presentation. But in Glasgow, well, I'm sorry, but in the Glasgow's in the 70s and 80s and 90s, Blue meant Rangers Football Club. So when the reps went into a Celtic pub and said, "Oh, you must have this new blue label," he was thrown out because everything was green. Green, the Celtic table, people like that.
Yeah.
So you have to do your research, and you have to see if it's going to be compatible and it's going to be acceptable. But not just in the UK and not just in Scotland, and I mean Scotland and London. You have to go further afield, abroad. Does this colour in Japan, is it going to work there? Is it going to work in Canada, America, or what have you? It's all about research. And not just from the books. Get out there and plod, get some leather in your shoes and check and talk to people.
Yeah. It's very easy, I think, for people to think they know coming in, especially from a corporate standpoint, that they've got the formula down and they know what direction to go in, and they can miss those little things. Like I loved reading that in your book, because I've been to Glasgow several times, and I always hear of that rivalry, but I didn't realize, and I knew it was a heated rivalry, but I never thought about the fact that if you were bringing a bottle in at a certain color, I wonder if Glen Murray has any problems getting into Celtic bars.
Yeah, but I mean, I have to say quickly that these, things have changed a lot. It's far more acceptable, but it's to some people it still matters. Not everybody's going to change overnight. There are people that still believe, no, it's not the right color for here, there, everywhere. So you've got to be very. My sort of point is you've got to be cautious, but really think about it. But today, because competition is so strong, you've really got to make sure everything on that label tells the consumer what he's looking for. As they say, it's got to say something on the tin, and it's got to transform to that.
Yeah. So talk about Charles Shaw's Roadshow and how was that an evolutionary point for you in turning into a brand ambassador as well as being a blender?
Yeah, Charles Shaw was a real marketeer, and he decided to take that sort of roadshow. But what he was doing, again, during that time, the mobile phones weren't about, but he got on a bus that had the White Mackay slogan, and we went to all these cities, and we had these carousel projectors, except it wasn't one, it was 12 of them. And as you can imagine, the synchronization was unbelievable. And then when we went to London, somebody took the main line and cut it off. That affected all the computers. So, it was a real headache after that. But generally speaking, it was a great, enormous success, because we went to the people. We had 100, 200 people attending these presentations, and they talked about the marketing plans, all the different innovations, packagings, but we were really talking about the blend and showing people to say, hello, how are you? What is this guy doing? So that was really the ambassadorial role before I would get out and go to all these different countries. But this was when blended whiskey was about 95%, not 96% of the whiskey market.
Mm. And so when you had that, I wonder, in reading, it shocked me that you said at one point that you were nervous in front of crowds, because you seem such a natural at it. Your humor comes through. But you had some tentativeness there apparently at the beginning.
When I did my first presentation, it was down in Campbellton, but even the road shows, I would be in the toilet throwing up. I mean, I still talk about it. Even Pauline will say, "You're doing a burley." Now, what was that? A burley was when I felt sick, and it would churn in my stomach and pretend to be sick, and then my eyes would be sort of glazed over. But it would be a way of relaxing. Okay, I've gone for these therapies, you deep breathing, etc., etc., etc. But every crowd is different. But during these early years, like the comedians of America, comedians of the UK, you've got to work at it.
Mm,
And even I remember doing one presentation in Yorkshire. Fantastic, everything went well. We went 50 miles down the road, same presentation, different crowd. What's going on here? It's just not the same.
wow.
So you're using all these things, but uh, it's actually more nervous to do a presentation to 50 people than 500 people.
Mm. Is that because you're going to get more feedback directly?
Correct. And the other thing, there's no question you'll never please everybody, and people might say, why do you throw ice? Why do you do this? Why do you let off party poppers? I mean, okay, that's kind of changed now, but in these early days, if you had to make something different, they'd never remember you. So the rockets, the ice, throwing the whiskey, etc., that was just a way of getting their attention.
Yeah. So were you tossing whiskey before then, or was it really when you started doing
Yeah,
presentations?
Donald McKinley with the famous film that he was in. Time was the beginning. It was called. He used to shake the whiskey like that and then nose it. But what I did was always throw it away.
Mm.
And I still, I mean, this morning I did it for a wee bit. Just I mean, it doesn't stain the carpet, but it actually cleans and makes sure that the glass is clean, and then you can go back to it. I mean, there's always madness in the method and the madness and all that.
Yeah, but it's not something you picked up from your father doing
No,
that.
no, no. He would tend to drink it. He would call it a snifter, and he said, "Time for another snifter." That's what it's all about.
Well, they used smaller capitas at that time too, didn't they?
Exactly. You're absolutely right. They were smaller computers, and these were the proper sherry glasses. And the one that I mean, there's plenty over here, but the one I had in the 60s, 70s became a little bit larger, and then about 1985 it came a little bit more bulbous and a longer stem. And these are the ones I really like. In fact, if you look at some of the archives for distillers for the White Horse blender, you'll see how big balloons, kind of almost like cognac glasses.
Mm.
But the one that's done today for the blenders is that particular one. Whereas now the Glencairn crystal glass is really making sure people look at the whiskey for the first time.
Yeah. I had a tough time when I was traveling around Ireland because I didn't have my Capita glasses with me. And so I was first when you're in a hotel room and you've brought your samples back home or back to the hotel with you and you're having to do it out of like paper cups. It just doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It's
And a lot of people that have never been there before, and I constantly say that I take a tumbler and then I put the whiskey in there. When I do the presentation, I said, "What's good about this?" It says you can get all five fingers in the glass along with your nose. Whereas when you take the capita and nose it, you can't even get a fingernail in it.
hmm.
So everything is concentrated in your nasal capacity, and you really are looking at it.
So let's talk about some different philosophies that have changed over the years. One that I found interesting was this idea of chill filtering. Chill filtering is something that now the general public is becoming aware of. You're starting to see it put on bottles. Um, but this was a technique that really only came about, I think, around a little before the time that you started in the industry. Is that right?
Yeah, because when we started blending in Glasgow and over at Leith, um, it worked generally pretty well. but the temperatures in the warehouses and some of the whiskies we're using were quite heavy, and therefore, if you send it to a country like Canada, was a typical example, going from say New York over to Canada, the time that it went over by train, it was subjected to really harsh temperatures, and then of course you got this colloidal suspension, and people looked at it and said, "Well, wait a minute, what's that dandruff in my whiskey?" Oh, that's the heavier oils. No, it's not. It's got sediment. Yeah, it's undrinkable. So the only way, of course, doing it is to chill filter it, to remove these heavier oils, so it'd be acceptable to the consumer. Okay, you could leave it and let it drop to the bottom, shake it, but it would still have that kind of sediment coming out, and it's perfectly natural. But the consumer is very demanding, so you can't have that, and that's when, well, give credits due. Distillers Company in the 30s were looking at it, and of course you could keep it at high strength that would avoid that. But if you had a customer, in a cold place and you had all these problems, the whiskey would be shipped back to you. So chill filtration is something natural. To other people, no, it's not. You're doing something, you're taking maybe something out of it. But if you're doing it in a light form, or what we used to do with Dalmore quite often, way back in the 60s, 70s, is we would bring our Dalmore down, we would reduce it to 46% alcohol and let it go cloudy naturally. And then we would take it down to 40 or 43% and then just filter it naturally, filter it in the normal filter pads, and that would remove it. But that became a very expensive business.
Well, and I wonder today, I mean, there are many opinions about it. There was a big hullabaloo over when Glendronach decided they were going to take that off of their labels because it was like, wait, how can you do that? But the explanation behind it was, we don't do it for all whiskeys, but we will do it occasionally when a barrel needs it. Sometimes you have to have the tools in your toolkit, and we don't want to be caught saying we're doing it when or not doing it when we actually occasionally have to do it. Is it a process that?
It comes back to the original. It comes back to your distillery and how it performs, and how it will take, and how you keep the strength at it, etc., etc. But you've got to do it individually. It's up to the individual distillery to do that.
Yeah. So when your father was putting out whiskeys, was he putting it out with chill filtering?
No. There was no chill filtering. It became for him the norm, and that is actually another reason why he started with his many different bottles, but he had these ceramic book bottles. And of course, you couldn't see the whiskey. And ceramics became very popular, particularly to the Far East. And you could leave these whiskeys for a long time because the consumer couldn't see what he was drinking.
Yeah.
But then people, as time went by, said, no, hold on a minute. I want to see what I'm drinking. I want to see that golden color.
Yeah.
So if we're going to see that golden color, you better have everything right.
It's interesting to see which brands still decide to go with dark glass. In my research on glass bottles in the 19th century, if you could afford to, as a bottler, or if you bottled whiskey, which was somewhat rare, you were always doing it in dark colored bottles like that, and then all of a sudden this moved to the clear glass. Interesting to see, and then to think, like, Ardbeg is a good example of a whiskey that if people looked at it and it was in a clear bottle, they might go, is that really fully matured whiskey, because it is so light in color? Yeah.
It even Drew, when you say something is naturally light, we used to have that on many way back, and I said, well, hold on a minute, you want to put that? And then we had some sherry casks. People said, Richard, what are you doing? I said, it's dark. Yeah, but this is naturally light. He said, because that's the stock I'm working with.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can't have that. I said, but that's the stock, and it's natural. It might be a little bit darker, but does it conform to that? So we had to change a lot of things like that. To get that consistency, as you know, from certain cars, first fill, second fill, third fill, you're going to get all these different colors. So uniformity, and what it does do, it gives you one word: confidence. Confidence to the consumer. You must have consistency. If you deviate from that, you're going to cause problems with your consumer.
Because they can visually tell that there's something up. Whereas, I talk about if you drank a Lefroy from 20, 30 years ago versus one today, you probably, if you put them side by side, are going to taste some differences. But if you put the bottles side by side, you're not going to notice much. Even their label really hasn't changed that much over the years.
Yeah. I mean, even Drew, when we had certain label changes with White Mackay, I remember one particular customer. He said, "Wow, you this new label, the whiskey's much better." I said, "What do you mean?" "Hey, it's got that roundness." I said, "It's exactly the same." "Oh, I can't believe you." I said, "Because the label looks so good, you know." And I went, "I'm sorry, but it is the same label." Yeah, and it's the same whiskey and the same, different label, But so you got to be very careful how you do it.
Well, and I've seen brands drastically change their logos, and it is interesting that it gives you a different impression of the whiskey even before you taste it. It's like, wait a second, they always had these really dark labels, and now all of a sudden they got this bright white label. What's going on with that? And you wonder if the whiskey inside has changed at all. And that brings about the question I have on blind tasting. Are you an advocate of doing blind tastings? Is there a place for those? Do you think people should use that to learn? Or because to me, the brand is part of the experience in tasting a whiskey. Now, when you're going barrel to barrel, you're not seeing anything but what the barrel looks like. But that's having an impression on you probably too when you're doing a tasting of it, I would imagine.
Yeah, blind tasting. We come back to the famous blue glasses. We do every day what we call triangle tests, and you can't see the color because it's dark blue. You don't know what you're drinking, but it really puts you on the spot. Do you see a difference here? If not, fantastic. But it does help you to do it. When we come to judge the whiskies at the International Wine Spirit Competition, International Spirits Challenge, it's blind. We don't know what the products are, but you are looking at it. It could be your own brands. It doesn't happen very often because they try and take the judges elsewhere when their own products are out there. But it actually makes you look and think and makes you be alert to what's going on here. And therefore, because as soon as you see a labeled bottle or a labeled wine and look at it and study it, you're going to be influenced whether you like it or not. So by seeing it blind, you've got to really put your wits and really concentrate.
Yeah. So let's talk last piece here about the Andrew Usher blend. Talk a little bit about Andrew Usher and his impact on blending. You brought an interesting point up in the book that I didn't realize. I know about the Spirits Act of 1860, which was basically opening the door to being able to blend grain spirits with malted spirits. I didn't realize that 7 years before that was also a change in the law that allowed the marrying of whiskeys from different distilleries, doing the vatting of whiskeys. What would his early days have been then, basically? Just going to a single distillery and pulling whiskey in from them? And would the Scotch whiskey police come over and fine you for if you blended a whiskey from one distillery to another?
No, I mean he was a real innovator But let's just go back a wee bit further back. His mother, as I say in the book, was making up sort of cordials, these sort of liqueurs, different sugaring, etc. And quite often Andrew Rusher Jr. was looking to see what his mother was doing and getting his opinion, etc. And I'd like to think, because of the sort of cordials that were being made up, Mr. Krabby, of course, took one of them eventually, and all that. He was looking for a particular style, but he was, as far as I was led to believe, he was always looking around and being innovative and seeing what Joe Public were demanding and wanting. And to my mind, yes, he was involved with North British Distillery. He was involved with many things, but he was an innovator that sort of drew many other people to his sort of advocation that say, look at whiskey for the first time and look at not just a single malt from the distilleries. I want you to look at blended whiskies. And that's what managed to enhance the whiskey industry. There were many other blenders, Sanderson's, Walker, you name it, Lundy, not so much Lundy. There was one more. But anyway, there were many people, Lowry, the Lowrys.
Yeah.
There were many people of that particular period that actually had the cask in their bars, and quite often they found, when they like Asher himself, when they were in the bars, they were in a bit of heated, they found, in fact, actually, I know we're topping up this whiskey, but this one has not been taken so much. But actually, the length of time it's been in here is actually changed. So holding it in an atmosphere, warm and all that, helped to sort of develop his career. And of course, thanks to him, he made a lot of money, and we've got the Usher Hall named after him. But very few people know it came from Mr. Usher, the whiskey man.
Yeah. It's an interesting time period, and interesting to see the evolution of whiskey through time and seeing how blends really went from that beginning to dominating the market, and they still really dominate the market to this day.
Yeah, they do. But again, because of the renaissance, well, not renaissance, but because of the whiskey industry all going for single malts of great ages and great standards and seasoning, people are very excited about it. But people should never forget, it's actually single malts that make the blends, along with the grains.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people say grains. No, it's not. If you mix the grain whiskies with the right malts, it can enhance it. And remember, generally speaking, 80% of blended whiskies is 80-20, that kind of market, around about the 80% grain whiskey to 20% malt. So it's 80% grains that are helping to enhance these whiskies, but the malts are giving the backbone and the structure. So never decry blended whiskies. They're smooth, mellow, and again, great successes are happening in the last 5 years, particularly with White Mackay blend.
Yeah.
It's back up there.
I did a little experiment with your Shackleton. Shackleton's it's definitely my favorite blend, because I like the complexity and because I, as you say, the kind of the heavier, muscly character that comes through on that particular whiskey. I did an experiment though the other day. I took some, I had Springbank 10. I had a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue that was almost empty. And I said, let me see if I can sort of make a little, not a complete match to this, but something that's going to sort of be in that area. So I took the Shackleton, which a friend of mine was the one who actually told me. He said, that Shackleton isn't that far off from what I'm getting out of this Johnny Walker Blue. There's age characteristics that are always going to be there, but he says, I'm getting all of that. So when I was tasting what was in that Johnny Walker Blue bottle, I said, the only thing this really is missing is that citrus note. There's like a really heavy, what whiskey do I have that has a nice big heavy citrus note to it that I could add to this. So I put it in there and then did a little side by side. And I'm like, you can tell, characteristic differences between them, but it actually, it worked out really well and came up with it fun blending at home and trying to see if you can match something that has the status that something like that Johnny Walker Blue does.
Yeah. But it's so important. Remember, the original Shackleton blend, the blending malt was high strength, 47.3%, etc. And that is so important because it went down to the South Pole, wind and rain, the blizzards conditions, but you needed that higher alcohol and that citrus. It is citrus, but it's grapefruity. You've got that sort of grapefruit tinge, but all the charm is there, but holding it long in the mouth.
Yeah.
And just that lovely tang that goes with it. But you need a bit of sense. When's the best time to drink this? Outside.
Yeah.
Get that sort of element of adventure inside of you, just to drink it at that particular time.
It's probably less of a heat of summer drink and more of one of those that when the temperature starts to drop, that's the one you want. Yeah. So you did this Andrew Usher event where you basically created you had all of these blenders come together and create blends, and then you blended all of those together to make this special bottle. The first question I have to ask, and would love for you to tell that story, but the first question I have to ask is, did everybody get a chance to taste what the blend was like?
Yeah, they all tasted it, but it was the first time, as far as led to believe, all the blenders got together. It was something really special, and that's why we wanted to produce the blend. And then we kind of sold it off at the Heritage Centre to raise money, etc., etc. But the Andrew Usher blend, it was something different, but it was something to show that the industry had moved on, and we were all talking, and we were all good friends.
Mm.
And you'll see Billy Walker behind me. A lot of people don't know why I'm smiling. Is because Billy just said in your ear, your blends are all out of rubbish, Richard. So if you look at the picture next time, you'll see I'm smiling, and it was a lot of camaraderie, but it was something that really alerted and it was something warm. One of the sort of events, milestones in my life that I would never forget.
So one other thing to really kind of jump into, because this question has been sort of gnawing at me as I talk to people these days. The term master, when we apply it to a idea like a master distiller, master blender, your own personal philosophy on that. Do you feel like that's a term that probably should maybe have some time behind it rather than it, because now it's become kind of an occupational term, but to me it sort of feels like master blender, master distiller means that you've achieved, or you may even be to a point where my idea of mastered is that you've done everything you can possibly do. You're really not learning anymore. You're at a point where you're teaching other people and your learning has kind of come to an end. Where do you fall in that spectrum of kind of your thought behind that term?
Right. It is a term that has changed dramatically. When I became a master blender, with my fellow master blenders, no question, you had to be in that position for many years. You had to earn that. And quite often, people would think a master blender is an old man going into the warehouse almost with a Zimmer and everything. But as it's changed over the years, younger people are coming in. and they've learned it. And so therefore, the master blend, he should still be ultimately responsible. But there are new terminologies that are coming in. And quite often, when we went to America, people said they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about, Richard. Because you're talking about Dalmore, we're going to call you master distiller. And he said, well, master distiller means a distillery. No, it really means you're a master blender because you're blending the single malts expressions of that particular single malt. But you're right. The master blender situation is something I still like because I feel honestly that I kind of earned it through many, many years. And here we are 50, 56, 57 years later. You're still a sort of master blender, although occasional master distillers. But it's making people understand. You have to make it for the customer. Will he understand what a master blender is? Will he? And even when you fill in a form today, a questionnaire, they say, give us your job title. And you put master blender in. What the heck is that? They haven't a clue what it is.
Yeah.
So you have to look and see what it will try and fit in. It's like chemistry or something like that. So it has its own problems. But generally speaking, the whiskey fraternity knows what a master blender really is all about.
So if you, sometimes the question is asked, what is your everyday drinker in terms of a whiskey? But when you're a you're a master blender, do you find time to sit back, relax, and just enjoy a whiskey? Or when you go home, are you kind of like, I've had a day full of whiskey, and so I'm not really interested in?
Yeah, I drink a lot of wine. I love champagne. I love Burgundies. Red Burgundies are one of my favorite. But I love whiskey at the right time, right place. Now, I've had a lot of whiskey nosing today, tasting today. So, tonight is a matter of chilling out and relaxing. But when it comes to the weekend, I do honestly love to sit down with certain of the single malts that we produce. And it's not just Dalmore, it's Jura, it's Fettercairn, Tamlin, and even the Invergordon grain whiskies, we've produced. But a lot of times I come back to the White Mackay blend. I mean, that's why when we produced the White Mackay blend, 50 years old, it was something I really loved because people said, you can't have a 50-year-old blend. Yeah, we can. And we've got whiskies that are 50 years old. And it really did help to show that we've been on the game of producing great whiskies for many years. But it's still a part of my life to sit and savor blended whiskies, single malts, etc., but in moderation.
Yes.
So let me quickly say that I'm not drinking all the time. I'm drinking, driving. All these things are so important. So I take these things very seriously.
I think we've gotten past, for the most part. I know there's part of the whiskey industry or people who are whiskey drinkers who still knock back a shot. And when I see that actually in a movie, I go, don't do that. But luckily, I think a lot of people are becoming much more interested in taking the wine approach to it and really getting to know their whiskey instead of just abusing it.
Well, quite often, thanks to TikTok and the video that's gone out, I think we're up to 35 million now or something. But I meet people in the street, they pass me and they go, who's that?
Yeah.
I said, are you that guy that does that? I said, well, but at least they're listening.
Yeah.
And that is, I mean, that video was done 13 years ago. And, people have said, well, what do you think? I said, actually, what I said 13 years ago is still good to this day. You cannot hurry whiskey. You got to put the top of the tongue, underneath the tongue, back in the middle, keep it in there for at least 20 seconds before you swallow it.
Very nice. Richard, I really appreciate it. Every time getting a chance to talk to you is amazing because it gives such a view on the whiskey industry that we can't always get because the experience of what was going on in the 60s and 70s and 80s, a lot of that I think is kind of getting lost, and it's fun to see that history and bring it forward into what's going on today. And so you're a great ambassador for Scotch whiskey, and I really appreciate you taking the time to relay your history to us.
Well, thanks very much for giving the opportunity, because as you've just hit it right in the nail. People said, "You did that all those years ago? You can't be serious." But there was no phones, no computers. You got on with it. Was it enjoyable? Yeah, because it was that different culture. But today, people are in a hurry. They have to have an immediate satisfaction. You can't be too boring. You can't be this. People are more demanding now than ever been. But in the past, we might have sat back a wee bit then, but it was still enjoyable.
Well, this is the best part of whiskey, is it gets you to slow down and pay attention. So, very good. Well, thank you so much, Richard. I appreciate your time.
Okay.